everyone. I'm Stephen Foskett, your host here from Tech Field Day headquarters. We have been watching NGINX Sprint. Well, actually, we watched it last year, and we're back watching it this year. And I am joined by a panel of independent technical folks who are sort of acting as the proxy for the audience and asking questions and discussing in between all these sessions. And that's what we're going to do next. So let's kick things off. Calvin, you get the first question.
All right. I was super excited about the last set of demos because it was all like application and development. And like, I'm just a super developer guy, probably in the room. My question is about unit. I have a unit, I'm unit curious. I'm trying to figure out who unit's really for. It feels like it's an app engine. I want to run a piece of code someplace where it can scale quickly and easily, but it feels like it's kind of non-standard. Like I'm running multiple different languages in the same container. I'm trying to decide which side that lands on and where we go.
Yeah, I mean, unit is an interesting one where, when it was originally started, it was originally kind of thought of as NGINX 2.0. And then as things progressed, kind of the outlook changed. And it's funny that you mentioned the container part of it, because a lot of this was, under development before containers really took off and all of that stuff. So one of the quotes we actually got from Twitter, I remember right after we first released Unit, was, "Oh, great, so I don't have to use containers anymore." So while that, could be a way of looking at it, it is an interesting idea of, it is not necessarily unneeded in containers, but it's also can kind of act in that way of having multiple things living on one host. It is kind of an interesting state because it is, a new project. It's still very much under development, and finding its kind of niche sweet spot there with the, balance of having that proxying and web serving capability on the front end, with also being able to support the multiple applications on the back end, and having more and more of that, load balancing built in. Some of the ideas is to be able to remove that extra layer that you would normally run in front of your application. So it just becomes part of the whole stack, so you're not, exposing it in a different way. As well as just, providing simplicity. That's kind of the main idea, is to simplify the amount of different tools that you're using in your stack so that you have less troubleshooting, right? Because I know where it's, you get waken up at 4 a.m. and you go, okay, wait, which environment am I in? What server are we using here? How does that stack up? So that's kind of some of the core concepts, and kind of as where it falls, it's waiting for the community to decide, right? Where it kind of makes the most sense, whether it's, using it for serverless platforms or more of the, kind of DevOps tooling versus, you could just be running your entire application stack out of it, or, like some of those early comments were, an all different way of doing it rather than containerization, because it is all API driven and you can seamlessly make all of the changes and all of that. It gives you a lot of flexibility for how you want to leverage it and deploy it.
Hello, Nick here. Would it be safe to say it's kind of comparable to Passenger then? Like, I haven't heard of Unit before, but it seems like it, instead of running something like Unicorn or Puma plus NGINX together, you can just run them together, just Unit by itself, right? Is it something like that or no?
Yeah, exactly. Except instead of just being able to run Ruby code, you can run, Go, you can run Perl, you can run Python, you can run all of these different languages in that same construct where, there may not be application servers like Unicorn or like Passenger that have that direct integration with a web server proxy functionality.
Okay, thanks.
So would you say the typical deployment model would be probably on something like a virtual machine as opposed to deploying it in containers? Because it kind of sounds like if I'm going to be using containers for my applications, wouldn't I just do like one app per container? But if I wanted to use a bigger resource like a VM, now I want to do multiple apps on one virtual machine? Or am I missing something about the benefit of running multiple apps in the same sort of run space?
Well, I think it can be a combination of both. In a use case when you're deploying in a container, then you'd probably fall into something where you wouldn't be running multiple applications, but instead it's a way to have that single application server that is being used across languages.
Okay, gotcha. So it's a consistency thing. I get to use the same base image for the deployment of my application. when the example that we saw, the demo that we saw, he went directly into the container to launch the application. I don't think that's typically how you would embed an application. So
No.
what would a typical workflow look like to get an application running on a bunch of unit containers or VMs?
I think a lot of that really just comes down to your workflow. It's very easy to stand it up with the different CI/CD pipelines and everything like that. Now, that one specifically was more to show the functionality and how you can interact with unit rather than showing how you would actually interact with it going off. So usually when you stand those things up, it will be part of a startup init script process as usual, right? So it'll be deployed as the container build process, and when it's brought online, part of the container coming online would be associating the different parameters with unit and with the application code.
Gotcha. Okay. If you don't mind, I'd like to shift over to service mesh, if everybody's okay with that.
Yeah.
I guess this is probably a question for Jenn. I didn't catch at the beginning whether Service Mesh, is that an open source project or is that a licensed thing, or is there a split between what is included in the open source version and the licensed version of Service Mesh?
Great question. I will say neither. So it is free, no license required, and the sidecar used in it is NGINX Plus, which was why we've decided not to open source it at this time, because we're using NGINX Plus instead of NGINX open source. That's all contained. So free for download on the website. The reasoning for using Plus instead of open source is you're getting a lot of features that you expect in a service mesh that, yes, you can do it with the open source version, but it's not as easy or as seamless. So, everything from blue-green to canary to what Aiden showed in terms of the secure access control just works a lot better with NGINX Plus in there. But it's totally free. It's locked down, so you can't take it out anywhere else, but you're getting it without the license.
Gotcha. Okay. And because it is NGINX Plus, we saw in earlier demos that there's two different control. There's the control center for the applications that could plug into NGINX Plus, and then there was the instance manager. Do either of those things come to play with the service mesh, or is it managed through its own
at
thing?
this time? Yeah, we're looking at the roadmap for in terms of what people really want for being able to manage a mesh. We haven't yet seen a lot of appetite for that because similarly to the ingress controller, it's often managed by a team that's not necessarily using those tools. They're using all those Kubernetes native tooling. So we want to hear what the market has to say. If there is a market for some kind of a management plane on top of the service mesh plane.
Great, thank you.
And I think the big part there too is the idea that if it will be there, it'll be optional, right? I think one of the big things with our service mesh is to not be required to use that level of tooling, to have the simplicity if you don't require the more, in-depth dashboarding and all those things.
Yeah, that's a great call out. It's meant to be as easy as a service mesh could be. Service mesh is often synonymous with complex, difficult, etc. And we don't want our mesh to be that way. So it's meant to be a set and forget, doesn't require a team to run it.
I have a question for Damian. So you were describing that reference architecture, and something that I got very interested was this open source roadmap where you are using the community to creating the roadmap. So is there something on the roadmap that you are excited, and how do you choose what to do next from the roadmap?
Yeah, I mean, right now we've kind of got our baseline functionality that we're looking to implement. So the biggest one is going to have the full CI/CD pipeline, building the application and doing more in-depth deployment. So you can do, automatic canary releases and things like that. Once we get there and have that, real V1 where it's kind of got the big picture that we're looking at, the main thing we really want to look into is making it pluggable. Making it so it's easy to swap out these different components. So we're probably going to spend more time not necessarily adding features, but instead working on making it very pluggable. So you can say, hey, I want to use, Armory, not Jenkins for my CI/CD pipeline. You should just be able to flip a flag and it will deploy a different one. Same with getting all the observability. We're going to start with Prometheus and Grafana, as that's kind of the baseline for Kubernetes. And then from there, we really want to make it so, like we said, it's stealable. It's something that people can actually use. And, even if it's just a little piece of it, but just being able to stand something up, really see what it does, how it plugs everything together, and, just giving everybody the options to set it up how they want, and be able to represent what they want to do or what they are doing. If they have existing tools in their environment, you can easily say, oh, okay, well, we're using this and this and this, but for everything else, we're just going to show you best of breed sort of deal. So that's where we're at right now. But, kind of like Jenn was saying with the dashboard, we want to see what people like. I mean, a lot of this just came out of our backgrounds of, running infrastructure and loving automation and wanting stuff that you just push a button and it goes. So once we get there, we want to know what everyone else cares about, right? I mean, we're just a small group of people working on this, so we have our opinions, but we want other people's. We want to make this something that's, helpful and useful, and something that people want to play with and work on.
Sounds cool. How do you prioritize that roadmap? So who does that?
Yeah, I mean, right now we're very early stages on this, and we don't have a defined process. But a lot of it too, like we kept saying, we want pull requests too. This shouldn't be something that is just developed internally. We really want to encourage people to, hey, don't let us be the blocker, right? Don't wait on us to roll it out there. Start working on it, see if we can do it together. But yeah, once we have a better idea, there'll be more info on the GitHub page. So everything will be run through there. So we'll definitely update it as we have better processes in place.
Awesome. I have a question. I'm not sure who it may be for. It's about the app protect inside of NGINX Plus. And during the security presentation, there was a mention of the elk stack dashboard where all the WAF rules can kind of report and you can go to. It sounded like, maybe I'm misunderstood, that was hosted by NGINX and basically free for users of the Plus product. How does that scale? That seems like you could have some pretty big abusers of that.
Oh, so I believe the part that was being referenced as being hosted by us is the dashboard information. So it would be something
so not
that
the Elastic.
Yeah, but the config for Elastic to visualize the information.
Oh, okay.
So it's not actually the full stack, because yeah, like you say, that could get really big. And also at the same time, you don't necessarily want like, oh, okay, here's my app protect and NGINX logs, but everything else is over here in my other Elastic logs. So it's more around the examples and getting things started so you can have an easy way to get started looking at that information.
Okay, that makes way more sense now. Thank you.
Of course.
Hi, it's Jason. Bit of a left field question, because it's actually just come from a real life use case as we were going through this sort of stuff. So you've showed a lot of great products and how to pull things together, and I've over the last couple of days you've talked about the sort of validated architectures and stuff. What kind of advice or kind of solutions are you trying to help customers with these days when we've got such a huge demand on online traffic? So the example I'm getting to is during this, Bungie released a new game, and their website was loading in the background, and I was set in a queue. And it's a common thing throughout the whole of the pandemic, and especially the silicon shortage and everything else. There's lots and lots of bursty traffic. And what solutions are you bringing to customers to deal with this kind of new normal of massive scale web requirements?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and we're looking at rather than having I think a specific one product or integration that would do that, we're looking more as the all up. And I feel like part of this is the reference architecture that we're doing and trying to drive more of on the thought leadership side, on the way of, hey, we don't have maybe a product that will fix all these problems or deploy this all for you, but we can show you examples of how you can architect your systems to work around some of those shortcomings and to really be in that space of, being the thought leaders and trying to get out there and giving examples and and really being able to pull, because we realize we're at that space where we have so much information about what is happening in all these given infrastructures, we can provide invaluable data back out. So I know we're working on some different AI and monitoring platforms and looking into that and how we bring all of this information together and how we push it out to other partnering technologies. So, there's a lot of different pieces that are all moving around there. I'll let Jenn jump in here if she's got something more.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that, in addition to everything you said, where we focus and where we get passionate is on the data plane. And that's what we see getting treated like a commodity and not necessarily treated as a core part of the strategy to make sure that you don't have those times where you're just sitting around waiting for something to load. And so, we're looking at constantly, how do we make NGINX Plus, NGINX Open Source, NGINX Ingress Controller, all of those technologies run fast, not get in your way, but also, kind of helping people understand that you can gain a lot of speed, reduce a lot of latency by focusing on a high quality data plane that you have really, really good troubleshooting and observability over. The data that you can get by looking at, those points where the traffic is going through, we've seen it reduce downtime dramatically, troubleshooting timing. And so kind of realizing that the data plane is both a core piece of that infrastructure to make sure that the speed is there, but also it's a tool that you can use in different places that you maybe don't think about the data plane being a big helper, whether it's visibility, security, stability, seeing that as something that you build from day one or day zero.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really like that, because NGINX runs the web. I think that's a fair thing to say, right? And you kind of hit on something I think is really good. Using the information you have, the community wisdom, the knowledge of you're everywhere, and then sharing that back out and helping people those lessons learned sound like a really good way forward.
Yeah, and on the observability front, I'll just mention that we are working on having full open telemetry support, not just in NGINX, where we will be taking over some of the maintaining on the open source C++ NGINX module for open telemetry, but also throughout the F5 product portfolio. So we're really kind of doubling down on that. Let's get all of our information out in a consistent format that's used widely around the technology space.
To shift back over to service mesh a little bit, and this might be roadmap stuff, I don't know, but I'm curious about extending the service mesh outside of a single Kubernetes cluster, because I know that's something that's been talked about before. Is, hey, MTLS is great between pods and different namespaces, but what about my virtual machines or my physical servers out there that I want to get incorporated, get that mutual TLS and all the other benefits of service mesh? Is that something you're working on? It's already done? What's the status of that?
You're not the first person to bring this up. I'll say, yeah, that does get into roadmap territory. We're looking at how to make that work in a clean way, in a way that's turnkey, because right now it's possible, but it's a little messy. And we want to kind of see what the appetite is for that. But yeah, we're hearing more and more about it.
Okay. Are there any coming integrations with F5 and their products to bring that into the service mesh, or is that kind of a separate networking sphere that you don't want to dip into right now?
Ooh, I don't think we're quite there yet, but we're looking at, both near term and far term, where we can pull in some integrations. Again, going back to the telemetry, the observability, what dashboarding is out there at F5 that we can start to hook into and be able to export data to. And Damian, you might be able to speak to a little bit more of that.
Yeah, and we do have a certain functionality, because with the service mesh, it integrates with our ingress controller, which does have the functionality of ingress link, which allows you to drive certain configurations on an external F5 device from the Kubernetes API. So you can make changes to the virtual server route definitions for your ingress controller that will then make calls out to an external F5 device to keep those two in sync. So there's some interesting thing there. And then, there's also a lot of stuff going on internally, looking at how we do more, especially when it comes to, the more recent Volterra acquisition, and they're what we kind of almost refer to as I've always referred to as kind of a site-to-site service mesh. So they have the functionality to connect your different infrastructures and have those communicating over it. And then, there could be definitely some interesting stuff done with combining that and integrating with service mesh and having it transport certain values from there. So there's a lot of good stuff we can look at, but we're trying to figure out the way to get it out.
Okay. I guess just getting back to the roadmap in general, and I was like, Damian's having some bandwidth issues. So Jenn, this is going to you. What are like the 2 or 3 things you'd like to mention about the roadmap for service mesh that you're super pumped about?
Yeah, this service mesh, I don't know if we mentioned it. I think Rob mentioned it yesterday in his keynote. We just GA'd it in May. And so each release is about making sure that it has the functionality that's expected. And so the last release was all about ease of installation. So air gap, Helm, there's one other I can't remember. In the near term, we're looking at operators on popular platforms. So Red Hat OpenShift, which will complement what we're already doing with the ingress controller, Rancher. And then, again, bringing up the core functionality. Further out, we're looking to see what I hate to sound like a broken record, but I'm going to do it, what the market's interested in. Service mesh is still somewhat nascent. And we find that most of our users are in that area where they're thinking about it and they're ready to play with it, but they're not really ready to get the value out of it yet. And so our core value is to make sure throughout this 1.0 series that experience is really solid, really easy, that it's not the horror show that you read about in various tech blogs. Not going to drop any names. But the stand-up experience, the administration experience, that needs to be clean. And so that's top of mind for us.
Right, that makes sense. Let people be able to install and experiment with it, and then you'll get a better idea of what use cases they have, because it's so hard to predict what they're going to use it for.
Yeah, sense. And we're getting a lot of excitement about the integration with the ingress controller. It's not necessarily unique to have a service mesh integrate with an ingress controller, but the way that we integrate is fairly unique. Getting down into the weeds a little bit, the mesh doesn't inject a sidecar proxy into the ingress controller. We use SMI spec so that it just hands the certificate over. And so what that does is it just removes the extra step, the extra point of failure, and makes that a very, again, clean, lightweight solution. So we're not bogging up the traffic.